Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Rowe.
And I'm Nique yours.
And welcome to The Invisible Men, where we make the achievements of incredible men invisible no more. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, and I'm a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
I'm Nique yours, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI.
And Nique, so good to see you. And as our viewers know, that we run the Invisible Men to tell stories of Black excellence, individuals who you may not know normally, but who are doing some amazing things, and people who exemplify excellence. And we want to just talk to them to demystify how it is that they got to where they are in life. And today we have the inimitable Eugene Robinson, a Renaissance journalist, author, musician, Stanford grad, MMA fighter, editor-in-large at OZY Media. Eugene, what is it that you do not do?
I'm a really bad graphic artist. I could not draw a cat for you to save my life. So
okay, most people on the planet probably don't know how to draw a cat well. So, but Eugene, welcome to the Invisible Men.
Hey, thank you for having me. And you got to get that middle initial in there so people don't confuse me with the Washington Post cat. He's H, he's Eugene H, and I'm Eugene S. So
yeah, but you could take him down in an MMA fight, right?
Very, very easily. But I figured, after a certain point, I mean, he and I are connected in social media because I used to get his checks from NPR, and I'm like, hey, what do you want me to do with these checks? He goes, well, I don't send them to me, I guess. All right, okay. But he's like 10 years older than me, so it's got to be kind of a drag. And he's a journalist, so it's got to be kind of a drag to have people ask him, so what about MMA? Because nobody, it never goes the other way. Nobody ever says to me, oh, I read your piece on Paul. I get a lot of his hate mail.
Well, he won a Pulitzer, didn't he?
He did win a Pulitzer.
Right, he's like, look, I want a Pulitzer. What are you talking about, MMA?
That's right. Exactly right. So,
well, it's so good to have you. So, we like to start off Invisible Men just by asking you just to tell us a little bit about your story before you became who you are today. Like, what was it that when you were growing up, you may have had an experience that defined you, that led you to start thinking in a new way about your life or what you had the ability to achieve? Tell us a little bit.
I've always, it's interesting. I had a friend, my college roommate, and he had come. We had driven across country at one point. The plan was for him to show up in New York, and we're going to drive back to Stanford across country. And he had never been. He was a lifelong Southern California guy, Orange County, in actual fact. And he came to New York, and as we were driving back, I said, "So what did you make of New York? Did you, as a California?" Because I've never really made my peace with California as a New Yorker. And he said, "Well, it's kind of an interesting place. Everybody's got like a hustle, I'm like, what do you mean? Define your terms." And he said, there just seems to be this kind of, and he started to describe what I think is kind of really particular to an immigrant experience. And out of a country of immigrants, New York is maybe more so than others, but that everybody, there's an angle that you're working. And that this has been a constant and continual feature of my life. I mean, I remember being 10 years old in Flatbush, and when it snowed, some kids was like, "Oh yeah, it's snowing, let's take a sled to the park." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that right after I get that shovel and shovel all these walks on the block for $10 a walk." I'll be glad to play with you after I do that. And then of course, people saw me making money and started to horn in on my action. But I've always, and I remember being 5 years old, and my great grandmother, she was in New Rochelle, and going to the laundromat. And when people actually did that a lot, and I said, "Nana, why don't you get a washing machine for the house?" She goes, "Oh, they're very expensive." I go, I got to buy my Nana a washing machine and a dryer. This is ridiculous going to the laundromat. So I've always had this idea that there was some sort of connection between things that people did even if it was just losing teeth and the tooth fairy giving you money and money and having your life be somewhat easier. Not necessarily, fulfillment was never the issue. The idea was if you're going to be alive, you had to do something. So, and if you had to do something, you might as well do something that, gave other people pleasure. So,
wow. So you've always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, and at one point, you get to that point in high school where you're too old to really be at home, And I remember thinking, I know I'm going to go to college, but I gotta, I'm a junior in high school. I can't keep living at home. This is ridiculous. And
how did you know you were going to college?
Oh, it was just it was a bridge for me. Exactly as it should be for many people to adult living. And there were things I wanted to study. And I also wanted to get out of New York, and I saw that as being the most reasonable way to do that. And there was never any question. It was, I hear people say nowadays, well, college is not for everybody. It was never in my mind any question at all about that being the kind of experience that I wanted to have. California was new. Everybody at my high school ended up going to, to the Ivy Leagues, but it just seemed kind of wasteful to me to take the 4 years and spend it 2.5 hours from from home. Right. I wanted to go someplace where I probably would want to go anyway, and to visit, and just, if I hated it, it'd be 4 years and I could go back to New York. And as you see, I've never been back to New York. So yeah, I wasn't honest with myself about who it is that I really was until probably midway through the first quarter at Stanford, because I showed up to Stanford to be a biologist. And I was sitting at Chem 101 class, and I was like, nah. I went to Stuyvesant High School, and it's a math and science high school. So I spent 4 years.
I went to Brooklyn Tech, by the way.
Okay, there you go. So
it's a safety school, so I went
yeah, that's what I tell my friends who go to Bronx Science. How's it feel to go to the second best school in Manhattan? So right. I don't know. I didn't. I figured I did the math and science thing and proved to myself I could for 4 years at Stuyvesant. I didn't want my college career to be the same, so I jettisoned the biology thing, and then I just kept ignoring the obvious. It's like I've been writing forever. I've been getting published forever. I sent my first query letter to Esquire as soon as I could write. Like when I was 9 years old when I sent it. I still have it, the letter. They rejected me, but it was like, nobody had ever. My stepfather was a journalist and, an award-winning journalist, but it wasn't like I got no career advice at all from him. He was just, it seemed like he did what he did because his father did it, and he didn't really like it. He was an inveterate reporter, and he's gone on to win the Pulitzer as well. He worked on the Rampart series at the LA Times.
Oh, wow.
But he's had a conflicted relationship with it, where it's like I decided I need to be an editor, so I didn't have to suffer the way reporters suffered, right? I could write when I chose, and I didn't have people really ripping apart my stuff. Because I remember him calling in changes and, arguing with the editors about what was going to happen with his piece. I was like, I don't want that to be me. And so then I went through each of the stages of media, like I did, in front of the camera, behind the camera, daily news, and I finally settled on magazines as being, personality-wise and temperamentally speaking, the thing that I was best suited for. So.
And where did the music journey? Where did it begin? Where did it launch?
The freshman year of college, I played sax in some group called Al and the X's, which was a short-lived thing. And then I have to credit the New York City Department of Parks, because I had a summer job before I came out, and it was one of these really weird city jobs. They loved me there. I did the summer before I got to Stanford, I worked there. And then I came back. They said, well, when you come back next summer, let us know. I came back, and they said, well, did you like what you did last year? I go, no, not really. We were mobile recreation groups, but there had been no pre-roll. So we would show up, and I had a team of people that we show up in parks and provide recreation. The idea was to turn parks back into parks, but there were no kids in these parks, So he said, well, what would you do if you could? I said, I don't know, something in an office. They go, great. And they found a place out in Queens for me to work, an office. But as it turned out, it was an office in an office building with a group that had nothing to do with the New York City Department of Parks. And I had one guy I was working with. And as far as I could tell, my job was to cover for him. I stopped, after the first 3 days, I was like, well, what do you want me to do now? Well, what should I do now? And then I realized, one, I needed to stop asking. And two, just cover for him. He goes, if Simonian calls, let him know I'm out and then call me at this number. This is before cell phones. And that was it. And so I said, well, if I'm going to sit here 8 hours a day, every day, I might as well do something. So I started publishing a magazine, start working on the first edition of the Birth of Tragedy magazine. And as part of that, I knew I also wanted to start a band. And so I came back to Stanford and started a hardcore punk band called Whipping Boy. So that's where that started.
Well, that's obvious that you just started a hardcore punk band. I mean,
I've been listening to punk since '77. So going to shows. I was doing two things. Like I would go to a punk show like on Friday, and then Saturday night I would go. I mean, I used to be a disco dance instructor, right? So I was going to like Studio 54 in New York, and Xenon, and all these, right?
Back.
Right. So late 70s. And then when punk rock hit, I got to check it out. And so then, I'd go either to a disco or, a punk show. So it took about 4 years for me to go, you know what, I could do this. And so that's how I got to the hardcore punk thing. So.
CBGB's part of your...
CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, Great Gildersleeves.
Right. So Nike's like, what are these two guys talking about?
Yeah.
I lived in New York. If you'd CBGB's, I remember that one.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody remembers Studio 54, but yeah, the funny thing about Studio 54 is I thought they kept letting me in because I was so cool. And then finally I figured out that they were letting me in because they thought I was dealing drugs. They're just like, he's a young black guy. He's probably got drugs, let him in. I thought it was just because I look cool, because, I get in and everybody would be asking me for things. I said, I don't have any. What is that? I don't even know what that is. So, but at least I got to get in and dance, which was my thing. So.
Got it. Yeah. So it sounds, okay, so your journey is a fascinating one. How did you, because it sounds like you were in worlds like punk rock, Studio 54. What was it like often probably being the lone black person or unique from that perspective? How did that shape your experiences?
Well, disco, I was not at all unique. I mean, there were plenty of black folks in the disco scene. Yeah, so that was not strange at all. I mean, I don't know that many of them were 16, but but that was fun. Having people try to have sex with you all the time it's a nice place to be when you're 16. Yeah, I have nothing bad to say about disco. But the punk thing, that was. I mean, I was a non-factor, at that point. I mean, there's a friend of mine, Adam Smyer, and it turns out he was 1 year behind me at Stuyvesant, and I was in a men's room at an art gallery in San Francisco, and I hear somebody say, Eugene? And I turn around, I go, yeah? And he goes, it's me, Adam. And it's just, the context was completely different. So he ended up coming out west as well. And he's written a book called Knucklehead, which is a great book, and it's gotten him on. He ended up doing some big symposium in South Africa on the strength of his book. But he said, yeah, man, you went to those shows, and I was into he's a musician as well and plays bass. He goes, I was into it, but I was just too afraid to go, so I didn't ever go. And I never had any sense of fear, but it could also be because I was bodybuilding. So I've been
add that to the list, Ian.
Yeah, I was competitive bodybuilder in high school, and I was working out at this gym in Ridgewood, the Olympia gym, and so I was, and I've been taking martial arts since I was 10, 11. So it's not like I wasn't looking for pals, you know. I just wanted to see the music. And I wasn't really especially concerned with anybody trying to hurt me, since I was easily stronger, faster, and more able. You know, Joey Ramone was not going to be beating anybody up, you know. So,
Well, one more question on the music. So you mentioned, which I never knew this, you played saxophone a bunch. Obviously, you put the sax down to become, you know, a premier vocalist. Was there a transition there, or just the sax kind of went away?
Well, a couple of things. I took violin. That was my first instrument, violin, and then I made a detour into banjo, and then I stopped those, and then I was terrible at the sax, so that's kind of why. I really enjoyed it, but I was not very good. And then I picked up a bass, and then a little bit of keyboard in Whipping Boy, and then ultimately I met musicians who were good enough where I didn't have to play. I could just communicate my musical ideas, and they could play what it was I had in my head. So and that especially came to fruition with Oxbow, where Nico Winter, the guitar player, is just like, I could sing something and he would play it, and I go, that's it. So.
One more question in the music vein, then we'll shift. So if Oxbow were to launch today, do you think the trajectory of the band, because of digital rights and the way the SoundCloud, do you think the experience of the band and its velocity and popularity would be much different from when you did launch?
I don't have a sense of that, really. I mean, a part of our success now is that we have this legacy thing happening, that and a length and breadth of career that has made it such that it's hard to compete. You know, right? I mean, you know, the bands that we've played with since we started, and we're talking about Oxbow now, since 1988. Some of them are legendary, right? And now the producer that we work with, who's won multiple Grammys, including, he was nominated for 2010 or 2007 for one of the records he did with us, plus Kurt Elling, plus the Shins, and we lost to Amy Winehouse's people.
Oh wow!
I mean, this is not likely to happen with a new band, though he works with new musicians as well. So it's hard for me to tell. I mean, I know. I'm involved with music, and I have lots of young musicians and new people coming to me, kind of, and it's a harder road to go. But at the same time, I was setting up tours on the telephone and sending letters. You know, it's not, social media has been a great boon in a lot of ways for music, at least for the live portion of it. Not so much for getting paid for your music, but if you can tour and have people show up to your shows by virtue of your SoundCloud stuff, and there are people coming off of SoundCloud into multi-million-dollar careers as well. So there are a lot. You know, the pipeline has gotten a lot bigger. You know, the record labels control so little now. Yeah, I imagine if you were a good band now, it's probably a good time for you.
So Eugene, you mentioned bodybuilding and sort of some of your athletic pursuits and martial arts. I know you've spent a bunch of years, commentating and reporting on and competing on occasion in MMA fights. But I know BJJ is something you got real passionate about. You know, I know the sport and I know combat sports well, but I'll be honest with you, I still don't totally get the absolute love that people have for BJJ and the loyalty they have to it. Can you help our viewers understand what's so special about it?
I don't know. I mean, I found that people who are into grappling typically, I mean, all of the wrestlers I knew initially when I started, when I was wrestling for a little bit in high school, they were all like math guys or engineers, or subsequently became engineers, and their worldview was, framed by a desire to control, the natural world around them. And I think the grappling arts are very much about control, right? In a way that, say, something like Muay Thai or boxing is not necessarily the case with those. So I think that the idea with grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a grappling art is to, take, aggressive, maybe probably hostile action and activity, and just break it down into its base elements and control all of it. And I don't know if you pay attention to the internet. There's Oklahoma Sooners wide receiver who just got into a scuffle with some guys in a bathroom in Oklahoma, and the guys are very much smaller than he. And I could see he was working with his animal brain, dealing with these men who were smaller than he was. I'm like, come on, go get out of there. There had been some scuffle, and he's trying to shoo them out, and his friend confuses their passivity for maybe fear, and he pushes one of the guys, which of course at that point sets it off. And these guys were MMA guys, and of course with a wrestling base. They say they're not wrestlers, but they have a grappling base, and they beat the slop out of these two football players in the bathroom. And people look at it and say, oh, it's this kind of violence, it's this beastly but I look at it as an attempt, an effective attempt to control chaos around them. Now maybe emotionally you get into the art of martial arts. At that point they should be able to say, I should rise above this and just leave the bathroom. It's easier to do that than what happened. But I had a Russian friend who was in Russia back when it was the Soviet Union. They would do these combines, and they would take all the kids to a gym at the age of 5, and they would run a athletic aptitude test. And whatever the coaches would look, and that one's a basketball player, that one's this, that was a wrestler, and they picked him for judo, given he was kind of short and stocky, so he figured his low center of gravity. And so at the age of 5, judo, like 6 days a week, every day until he got to high school and came to America. I think that I think that being prepared to deal with an unpleasant world, it makes a lot of good sense to me. And so for me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very, very much a part of that. And it really does smooth out my interactions with other men, which can be, if you don't have a basis in martial arts, can sometimes be fraught, like I write about in the fight book. Even if it's polite society, at the same time, if a voice gets raised, you really have to you have to take stock of all of your options. And if you don't have that as an option, you're going to respond out of fear. It's not always the best place to be. I hated that feeling inside myself enough to begin at the age of 10 to do something about it. And that's to study martial arts and to learn how to defend myself. So
very good. Well,
and I tell you honestly, raising my kids in martial arts has been really interesting, because they have no experience of somebody coming at them with hostile intent and not having anything to draw on, not having any arrows to pull out their quiver. They just, I don't know if you had that story where we decided, my kids have all gone to like smart kid schools, right? You remember Ruby. And I said, well, let's send Ruby to just a normal camp. She did, some other people she knows are going there, and she's walking across the field at this, just a kids camp, just like, nothing, no special school for bright kids, just a kids camp. And she's walking across the field by herself. And so, this group of boys are there, and she was maybe about 11 or 10, and these 12 or 13-year-old boys were there, and, their animal brains are working. They see her walking by herself, and one guy says, well, kind of watch this, and he takes a run at her, and for no reason, runs at her and jumps to kick at her. And, Ruby was training 3 days a week at that point. She sidesteps, arm drags him down, gets a knee on the belly, and goes, what are you doing? And he's like, okay. He's, Kung Fu. And she's like, and she just kind of shook her head and kept on walking. And that it never happened again. So again, it's been, I didn't have that. The first time I was called on to defend myself, I had nothing to draw on, and it was not a great feeling. So.
Very good. Well, we've got a section of every episode that we call the speed round, where we put in front of you a couple of individuals or philosophies, ask you to pick one and tell us why. So we'll start with Martin or Malcolm.
Well, that's a two-part question, actually. Of course, and this is going to be the case as a younger man. Of course, Malcolm, right? It resonated well the 15-year-old that I was in New York City at the time. But it was probably very easy to be Malcolm in New York City in the 60s, right? I mean, if you start to know a little bit about life as you get older, and you start to think about how heavy it was that in Selma, that you would be, Martin in Selma in the American South, it's like, hey, man, that's an order of magnitude different, especially with, this espoused philosophy of nonviolence, right? It's like, it's if you've ever been in the scene where you've been attacked by a mob, and sadly I was there once, you got to know that kind of what Malcolm or what Martin pulled off was orders of magnitude just heavier. Not everybody does that. Not everybody could do it. Not everybody would do it. But I like the articulation that Malcolm added in terms of like, you push and I got to push back a little bit. And the days of yes, y'all in are done. So,
Well, let's go back to MMA for the next question. So it's Anderson Silva or Jon Jones?
I'm going to have to go with, I know you have a personal preference for Anderson, but I just wrote a piece. This guy's writing a book, and he asked me to contribute 500 words to it about Jon Jones. And I do a comparison between Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier, and I do it along the lines of the Old Testament with Cain and Abel, with interesting enough, with Cormier being Cain and John being Abel, except the story ends very differently than it does in the biblical text. I think that I think we are in the midst of witness. There's a strong possibility that after Israel Adesanya and Jon Jones cease fighting, that I'll probably cease paying attention to mixed martial arts. But these guys are both on some Achilles level, Hercules level, touched by the gods level things. And fundamentally, there's something that Anderson Silva said that was really revealing. And he said he gave credence to the line that the heavy, what is that line about? Heavy as a head that wears the crown. That it wasn't the diminution of his skills or anything, but it was just the rigors of being touched by God that kind of wore him out. Whereas with Jon Jones, you don't see any of that, and he's had his troubles outside the cage. But that's traditional. People forget that the labors of Hercules were essentially post-release punishments because he flipped out and killed a bunch of people. So the gods were like, okay, to make up for that, you have to do these labors. So it might happen that if you put, jet fuel in a human vessel, that it has a hard time functioning on a human level. But I think that Jon Jones, we're all waiting to see him become human again, by clearly, most easily by losing. But I don't see that happening in the short term. But I'd like to be there when it happens. And I've interviewed him before, and he's a little bit churlish and a little bit touchy, thin-skinned, but it is clear to me that he is very much connected to a certain type of greatness that doesn't come along often.
Oh, that was an essay unto itself. Thank you for that. Last question: Stuyvesant or Stanford?
Oh, Stuyvesant. I hated Stanford. I really did. But you have to understand the context that when I got to Stanford, right? When I got to Stanford, it was 1980, and it was the beginning of the Reagan Revolution. And I was going to school with a student body that was largely drawn from California. And the way California schools are structured, that meant that I was going to school with people who didn't know or had dealt with in any significant numbers Black folks at all. And one of my roommates was from Oregon, and they asked us to introduce ourselves, in the freshman dorm, and he tells a story about how he and his brother and his uncle would dress in orange suits, and they would get in their Cadillac and drive around Portland with the lights off, and then they would hit raccoons and stun them, and then put them in a burlap sack in the back, and then take them home and cook them over the fireplace at home. And I look at this room of white folks, and I can see that they're all buying this completely preposterous story. And I look at my roommate, who actually was my best man, my first marriage, I look at him and he's looking at me like, they're buying it. I mean, of course, and he never disabused him of the notion that black folks in Oregon don't hunt raccoons with Cadillacs. He just never did. He never thought it was necessary. So it was the Reagan Revolution. I was dealing with people mostly from California who hadn't dealt with African American. And then the black folks I met at Stanford in 1980 were also nuts too, to a certain degree. I mean, all the black friends I had at Stanford were from New York, DC, or Chicago. It was just something about California that was making people crazy back then. So it was at one point, a friend got angry with me. He goes, you're complaining all the time. These are the best years of your life. You don't have to work. You're surrounded by the greatest number of people your own age. And, you should appreciate it while you can. And he and I are still friends. And I said, and now that I'm almost 59, I can tell you that Stanford, those were the worst 4 years of my life. Everything from that point on, it's all been gravy. Before then, all gravy. That 4-year period was very tough.
Very interesting. Ian?
Well, Eugene, so I mean, if Stanford was the worst 4 years of your life, I mean, your journey has just been fascinating. So as you think about your next 30, 40 trips around this earth, how do you think about your future? What's your legacy going to be? You've had such a remarkable time.
Well, I mean, I think the goal is to do less of what I don't like and more of what I really like. And insofar as that's possible, every day that's more the case than not the case. I mean, writing ultimately, I've done 3 or 4 books. And I find that to be a really enjoyable exercise. We're right in the middle of adding a choir to the new Oxbow record. And then I've got a side project with a bunch of Italian musicians, another band. And that record is slated to come out in the next 8 months called, the name of the band is Buñuel. And ultimately, I think, in terms of retirement from day-to-day 9-to-5 living, I see myself settling outside of this country. I've by virtue of being in a band and touring all over, I think I've been to every state in America with the exception of Alaska. I think Alaska is the only one I have not been to. And, fine country. I'm kind of done with it. And I've also toured a lot in Europe and Asia as well. And so whether it's my kids are all 3 of my kids are all. I've got 2 who are still in college. One has graduated from college, and my youngest, who we've heard screaming in the background, is about 7. She in a few days is 7 months old. But when you have one kid whose mother is European, traveling is. Specifically to Europe is not that difficult and probably desirous at some point. So I remember looking at Architectural Review had this piece on writers in their nooks. And they were, they showed Norman Mailer out in Cape Cod at this wonderful, wind-strewn beach house where his sunny nook where he was writing. And at the time I was at Nikon, and my writing nook was my desk. I had to share my cubicle space with a building column, which I chose because it made getting into the office difficult. And so if I was working on something that was non-work related, like was at the time my novel, I could kind of write my novel a little bit on my lunch break without people looking over my shoulder. And I go, this is my writing nook. So ultimately, I see myself in the Norman Mailer version, even though I remember Bukowski once said, and I think about this constantly, he said that nobody that was worth a damn ever wrote in peace. So all these writers looking to write in peace, you're not going to get that. But and I don't need it. But I'd like to spend more time doing that and less time doing stuff I don't like. So.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, as we come to the close, I would love, as you've now looked back in your life and this idea, you want to do more of what you like. talk to us about Darryl, or talk to Darryl. You know, as you know, Nique and I created the Invisible Men really as a vehicle for all of us who've had a journey as Black men, have faced all sorts of challenges, sometimes succeeded, sometimes not. You know, but what have we learned on that journey? And as you think about a 16-year-old Black kid living in forgotten USA today, an imaginary urban city, hearing all the messages that you think that he's probably hearing, what would you say to him? You know, what's the counsel you would have so that Darryl can do the things that he does like and not do the things that he does not want to do?
I remember somebody was talking about a special forces guy, and had, seen lots of military action in places, very dangerous places. And he said one thing that he had learned is that movement is life. Right. So hunkering down in a place, your bad things happen to you are just an eventuality. And I understand the lure of the neighborhood. It could be dysfunctional. There could be, but it's your dysfunction. But the reality of it is, my take when I finally got out of this country to visit other places, I think I hadn't left outside of the Caribbean. I think the first time I got to out of Europe was 1990, and there's just something, Eudora Welty said it best. Travel is broadening, but I don't say you have to go to Europe. I don't say you have to go to the Caribbean even, but you got to get out of your community. And the only regret I have, people say, oh, what would your message to the youth be? What would you? I say, I think about my younger days, and I have one regret, and that regret is that I didn't work harder. Your sense of time is very different when you're 16. And when I think about the almost the panic fueled drive to succeed that I had in my 20s and my 30s, because there's no intergenerational wealth necessarily, right? So it's like there is no safety net. There was, if I couldn't pay, if I couldn't figure out a way to pay to Stanford myself, I was going to have to go back to Brooklyn College, right? And if I couldn't make it pay after college, there was no place for me to go really. You have to get out and just get out and get away. And I think one of the best ways to do that, a friend of mine, I think I spoke to him earlier, to a certain extent, one of the engineers, he studied to be an engineer, but he also learned how to be a mechanic because his plan was always to escape this country. And he goes, people always need to have their cars fixed. And if I can't make it work some other place, I can work, I can study in Germany, do the research I want on quantum mechanics, and work at the Audi shop. I can easily do that, and I have a stepbrother, ex-stepbrother at this point, I think he's passed on, who didn't really make it through high school. Things weren't working too well for him. I think he was having some mental health issues. But one thing he did do and have was he had to learn to trade. He learned how to fix cars. So unfortunately, he didn't get out though. So, but you have to change your base of operations. And when I look at my neighborhood in Flatbush, the one I grew up in, and now, the benefit of Facebook, I can see, and it was a healthily middle-class neighborhood. There were the sons and daughters of construction workers, bank presidents, academics, doctors, lawyers, but also cab drivers and construction workers. And nobody lives on the block anymore. But they've all gone on to, different, interesting, varied careers, and they've all moved. The ones who didn't move, actually, sadly enough, a lot of them, I say a lot, at least 3 of them have passed on. So you got to move. And you got to get busy. I knew a cat from a Haitian guy I used to work with, and Janus was his name. And dude had like 3 or 4 jobs, and they weren't great jobs. I was a cashier at a fast health food store in high school, and he was an adult male, but that was one of his jobs. And he had 2 other jobs. He slept about 3 or 4 hours a night and was working. That's that's hustle. It's like, if that's what I got to do to be able to create a situation for myself where I'm not going to be miserable, then I got to do it. And it was like, well, this is shameful. Yeah, screw your shame. With the Chinese, a friend of mine was in China. He said, oh, they had this great saying in Hainan Islands. And I go, what is it? And he said, don't laugh at the prostitute, laugh at the poor person. I go, oh, it's kind of hard for the poor people. But, the idea was that, you've got to be fruitfully engaged, I guess. And otherwise, there's actually no hope, really, right?
Wow. Well, Eugene, thank you for your words of wisdom, a life well lived, and still a lot more to do. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Invisible Men. If any of our viewers want to see any prior episodes, please go to www.invisible.men if you want to check out any of our other amazing examples. But Eugene, thank you very much for joining us today. Nique, any parting words?
Yes, well, I'll say I think this episode is our densest, and so I think our viewers, this is a to-watch episode. You're not going to get everything out of it, viewers, until you listen to our brother at least twice. And that advice for Darryl is good for me too, brother. So I appreciate it, and congratulations on the new baby. Send me a
thank you. Oh, I will. And then also you should check out the eugenesrobinson.substack.com. I decided to start a newsletter because there was a room. There were pieces that I couldn't get into OZY because they were like, this is a little too edgy. This is a little rough. And so I go, they said, you can do whatever you want with it. So I go, okay, well, maybe I got it. I'm going to start a newsletter called Look What You Made Me Do. So
I know that catchphrase. Well, I'll be signing up most definitely.
There you go.
Right. There you go. Okay. Well, Eugene, thank you. And thank you, our viewers, to watching another episode of The Invisible Men. Thank you for watching another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes at the AEI podcast channel on YouTube, or the website invisible.men, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.